My sermon passage is the 23rd Psalm, page 476 in the Pew Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The word of the Lord. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. This passage, this 23rd Psalm, should be as familiar to us as our own aches and pains and our usual remedies. Aleve, Lidocaine, Doan's pills, blue emu oil, or whatever ointments, salves, and poultices we use. That's the way it works. We hurt, we seek relief by reaching into the medicine chest, medicine cabinet. Well, when it comes to life and death, we should also seek relief by opening the oldest hymnal we have, the one right in the middle of the Bible, because there are balms in the Psalms, and the 23rd one is especially good medicine. But as familiar as we surely are with it, I heard some of you reciting it as I was reading it. As familiar as we surely are with it, we're probably not as familiar with everything that's in it, like actual medicine. Who knew that Aleve is a nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug, mostly naproxen sodium? Or that Lidocaine is actually Lignocaine, an amino-amide local anesthetic C14H22N2O, formulated as Lignocaine hydrochloride. Or that Doan's pills are made of Magnesium salicylate tetrahydrate, another kind of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug. One more. Or that blue emu oil is actually made from the oil of that big bird, that big Australian bird, which is technically a ratite, with a dose of Trolamine, salicylate, and maybe some aloe vera. Now, whether you knew or not, and Dr. Mize did, I assure you, and I know Dr. Nurse Elder Patsy did. We had a good laugh when I was going over this with her. You don't need to know all that before you reach into the medicine cabinet. Knowing it can't hurt, and it might help actually, depending on your own personal contraindications. I have lived with a PhD for 26 years now. I know a little bit about it, just enough to be dangerous about medicine. So let's look at some of the ingredients of today's Sunday morning medicine, the 23rd Psalm. It won't hurt and it might help, depending on what you're going through. If you look at the bottom of page 76 on your Pew Bible, there are some footnotes for the 23rd Psalm. 6 instances where the translation from the Hebrew into English could have been rendered a little bit differently. Here it is again with those changes. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the waters of rest, not still waters. He restores my life, not just my soul. He leads me in right paths, paths of real life, not just churchy sounding paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, that's still a great life metaphor, but minus the religious overtones that we have put on to this over the decades and the centuries. The valley of the shadow of death, that has a real church ring to it, and it can detach from the reality, right? So another way to put it is, even though I walk through the valley of deep darkness, that's kind of a universal metaphor. I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I have to remind you of this, when I learned it, sheep are always in the presence of their enemies. Always. If they don't have a shepherd, they're open to prey and to things that want to hurt them, kill them, or eat them. So that's something to keep in mind. The shepherd always has his hand on his sheep. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup overflows. Only goodness and kindness is an alternative translation. Not surely goodness and mercy Surely has a question hanging over it, doesn't it? Surely goodness and mercy. Another way to put it is, only goodness and kindness shall follow me all the days of my life. And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live, which is to say, forever. Now, you might think of the difference as something like this. The church and its translators have made the 23rd Psalm a prescription medicine for believers. But in plain English, it's available over the counter to anybody needing it and to anybody with ears and the heart to hear it. Closer, with a little help from the late Patrick Miller. He was a professor at Princeton and an ordained PCUSA minister. First, he called the 23rd Psalm, quote, a song of trust that may have been evoked by an experience of deliverance, such as the one described in Psalm 22. All right. Now, looking back to Psalm 22, we see the first verse and we hear Jesus on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Well, Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34 say, at about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, some critics want to claim that the writers of the Gospels of Matthew and Mark put those words in Jesus' mouth. I prefer this. I read somewhere that by quoting the first line of the psalm in that oral culture when most people couldn't read, Jesus was using a typical shorthand way of getting hearers to recall the whole psalm. Okay? In other words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me is a cry of anguish, but it was also a signal that while he may have been down, Jesus was not out, and that his followers should stand by. They did not, as we know, but for a few women. But they did get the message if they remembered all of Psalm 22, which starts as a cry of suffering and anguish, but then turns and becomes a prayer of thanksgiving for deliverance from the thing that was causing the anguish. Psalm 23 then is a reflection on the responsiveness of God, the divine shepherd, to cries for help and prayers for rescue. Now let's skip through the verses of Psalm 23. Skip like a lamb, like a young sheep, because that's what's going on in verses 1 to 3. My shepherd puts me in green pastures with the best water. He helps me stay on the safe paths. You know, sheep imagery, God is the shepherd and God's people as the sheep. It's all over the Bible. Psalm 95:7, for he is our God and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Psalm 100 verse 3, know that the Lord is God. It is he that made us and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Isaiah 40:11, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. In Ezekiel 34:11-16 is a very powerful passage, but I'll just read the first part of it. It starts out, for thus says the Lord God, behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. And then, of course, in the New Testament, John 10:11, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And then John 10:14, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Now I have to stop here and go off script. There's a little video clip going around, and it says actual footage of, what does it say? It says actual footage of Jesus helping me stay out of trouble, or whatever, get me out of trouble. And it's an actual big fat sheep, right? And it stumbles into a ditch, an irrigation ditch. And it shows the guy down there wrestling in the mud, getting that sheep back up out of that water, out of that ditch, back onto the ground. And that sheep, what do you think it does? He goes, boom, again. And it's so real. It's so real. All right, now back to the 23rd Psalm. Verse 1, it says, I shall not want, as Israel lacked nothing when they were wandering in the wilderness. As it says in Nehemiah 9:21, one of my favorite verses, the older I get, 40 years didst thou sustain them in the wilderness, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell, end quote. Psalm 23, verse 4, that dark valley, I believe that is the summation of the confidence of salvation held by one in the distress of dark times who calls out to God and hears, "Do not fear, I am with you. Thy rod and thy staff that comfort me." The rod is a club. It's a weapon to fight off predators. And that staff is a kind of a staff with a hook or a crook, which we've all seen on one end. That crook is used to guide the sheep and to get them out of the ditch and to keep them from falling into it in the first place. Psalm 23:5, Professor Miller says, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies." He says that harks back to the provisions, the manna, the bread from heaven, and the quail that God made and sent to Israel in the wilderness. Of course, God provided the ungrateful vagabonds with so much quail that they were so selfish, gluttons, that they choked on the meat. But they couldn't say they weren't fed. There's some smart aleckness in the Bible sometimes. God gave them just what they said they wanted until they couldn't stand it no more. Beware that God give you what you think you want, because you might wind up choking on it. That's the truth. "And thou anointest my head with oil." That's how one showed respect to honored guests, recognizing them as chosen by God and as having divine favor. Sheep gate open metaphors everywhere. What a thing to say about a sheep. We're honored sheep. We're sheep, but we're honored. But the metaphor has teeth. God is continually present. God is with us. No matter what's happening to us, no matter what's happening to our bodies, no matter what's happening to our relationships, our community, or the world, Psalm 23 helps restore us to ourselves. No wonder it is beloved. It is medicine. And finally, the last verse tells us the effects of that medicine. Psalm 23:6, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." You have heard this before, but I promise myself that I will not preach the 23rd Psalm without emphasizing this every time. The Hebrew word translated here as mercy is chesed. And it can be translated as steadfast love or kindness or loving kindness. There's no one word in English that can contain all that is included in the meaning of that Hebrew word. But I think what it says is something like fiercely protective and possessive love, almost explosive love, like a mother bear protecting her cubs. That's how the prophet Hosea describes God's love. And that's the love of God in the 23rd Psalm. And the word follow, it's not that nice either. It's not nice, God's love. God's fiercely protective and possessive love doesn't just follow behind us, waiting to catch us if we fall. The Hebrew word means to pursue, like a soldier pursuing an enemy. It means to track, like a hunter. It means to hound, like a bloodhound. God's love dogs us. God and God's fiercely protective and possessive love dogs us. We are God-dogged, to put it in my vernacular. We can't shake it. It won't go away if we get worried, and it won't vanish if we fall into fear or into a literal ditch, because it's God's faithfulness that keeps us, not ours. Thanks be to God. Again, I was in my 40s before I got that. It's not my faith. It's the faith of God that holds us all up. It's it. Now, that's an awful lot to chew on. So let me ask the late PCUSA minister, faithful but faulty, Eugene Peterson, to bless us on our way with his paraphrase of the 23rd Psalm from the Message. "God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath. And then you send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me. Chase me every day of my life. And I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. Thanks be to God for the balm of this psalm.